Yeah, I think, yeah, we are broadcasting now. Perfect. Okay, well, welcome everyone, guys. It's been 2 months, I think. It passed very, very quickly. I couldn't even notice the difference between the days now. Is it Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, or Saturday, or Sunday? All days, I think, quite similar. But this event's at least kind of a highlight of the day for me. So I'm enjoying them tremendously. And thanks, guys, for joining us. Today we are going to have a very packed event in terms of the number of people who are going to present and the topics we are going to discuss. Just a few kind of rules of our meetup to remind for those who haven't participated before. So there are the 3 key pillars that we have in our meetup. The first one is an openness. We openly discuss any problems, any challenges. This is not a marketing event. This is purely event for practitioners and by practitioners, and we want to openly discuss the challenges that we have among us. And it's willingness to share. Every member of our meetup, we really encourage you guys to join us, to participate, and to do some presentations, even maybe small ones, because I think that's the people who typically don't speak much at the conference or somewhere else who has a lot of things to share. I think it's very, very important for us to have. And I want to acknowledge our amazing team of organizers. Since you guys joined, Bora, Peter, Dennis, since you guys joined, we were able to do it like every 2 months consistently with amazing topics. So great thank you for you guys for doing this for our community. It's very important. And I want to thank EPAM to support our initiatives with meetups across the APAC region, and every member of our community who decided to invest your own time into this one. And this is like 2-3 hours of your time that you could probably spend on some other activities. So big thank you for you guys for joining us. Today's agenda, we are going to have 2 presentations. The first one will be about the topic of accessibility, and Chris Burke is going to talk about this topic shortly. The second one will be a topic about how to write the content for the chatbots, and Adrienne and Merlo are going to talk about it. And then we'll be having a panel discussion run by Bora, and we'll have Alissa, Chris, and Katie on this discussion with us. And then, we are going to do some networking and Q&A, and typically it takes like 10, 15, 20 minutes after this for have this networking and a lot of different questions. That's it, guys, from my side. I hope you enjoyed the conference. Dennis, it's not a conference, sorry, just a meetup. It's still just a meetup. Dennis, would you like to share something about the next event as well that you're preparing?
Yeah, thank you for that, Pavel. So I think following a lot of the feedback we've been getting to date around the levels of interest and what topics people want to see in coming sessions for the Chatbot Meetup, there's a lot more into the deep dive. So we've done a lot around business cases to date, how to fine-tune use cases, etc. And I'm sure as new people join us, we'll have to revisit those topics or refine them as well. But there's also been a growing interest into deep dives around, how do we do specific topics? And that's why, this one's been organized largely by Bora around the accessibility and content, so the information that's presented and shared. The next one I'm organizing largely around NLP. So it'll be a deep dive into natural language processing, natural language understanding. We're looking to get speakers already lined up for, on the ground in the coalface, someone to share with you the lessons learned and the challenges they faced in implementing real-life enterprise bots from an NLP standpoint. But likewise as well, we'll be looking at, from a research perspective, what is the current state of the art from NLP, NLU perspective. So hopefully that means that everyone that comes to listen to these events can start to see, what's it like on the ground to deliver a real life application, and also what's the cutting edge of technology in that space of NLU, NLP. And that way, you can sit somewhere in between there, hopefully, and keep pushing the boundary in terms of performance of your bot. I do also open up then to say that if you have any other topics that you'd like to deep dive into, whether it's ethics or privacy, security, etc., on voice and chatbots, do let us know, and we'll do our best to secure a range of great speakers and lots of informative information. That's it from me.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Dennis. Okay, Chris, over to you. Let me stop share my screen and get all attention to you.
Okay, thanks, Pavel. I'm just going to share my screen. So I assume everyone can now see that.
Yes.
Yep, got it.
Great. Okay, so thanks for the intro. I've got a presentation on the topic of accessibility. This is actually based on a 1 hour presentation that I've done time and time again. I've tried to strip it right down and squash it into 40 minutes or so. So we'll see how we go. I might have to skip through some of it, but I'm just going to dive right in and make a start. So just firstly, a couple of dot points about what I'm going to be covering. I'm going to do a quick intro, and then I'm going to start right at the start and talk about the definition of web accessibility. So as I said, this is based on my intro to web accessibility that I usually deliver, where I kind of assume that everyone in the room has no prior knowledge of the topic. And the reason I do that is just to start right at the start and make sure everyone's on the same page. And then we'll unpack some of the facets of the topic. So we'll get into the who's impacted, what is WCAG, where does it fit into the design process, and then there's a couple of things I want to talk about specifically for you guys tonight, which relates to the chatbot space, so assistive tech, in particular screen readers, and then I'm going to run through some key points to consider around implementation with an accessibility viewpoint. So let's jump in. My background, I've been around digital for 10 or 11 years. Most of the work that I do these days is consulting for the most part as a BA. So doing the discovery and hand-holding with clients, working out requirements and that sort of thing. I'm working with Revium at the moment as the web accessibility lead. So I'm keen to get started with Revium and working with some of their clients to see how we can do better in the space of web accessibility. I've also been a judge 3 years in a row for accessibility at the Australian Web Industry Association Web Awards. It's a bit of a mouthful, but that's been a really interesting thing to do and give back a little bit with some knowledge to help the Web Awards entrants do better with their accessibility as well. So let's just jump straight in, and I'm going to start right at the start with what is web accessibility. This statement is a good starting place. Accessible web design refers to the philosophy and practice of designing websites so they can be accessed and operated by everyone, regardless of ability or situation. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's a good place to start so that it gets us thinking about the topic of web accessibility. So we do mean that it's the practice of being inclusive and designing our digital products so they can be operated and accessed by everyone. And I'll unpack that further as we go. There are important similarities between designing for accessibility of the physical environment and designing for accessibility in the virtual environment. Things to point out, we're quite used to seeing things in the physical environment or the built environment around accessibility. You're obviously used to seeing ramps, access ramps, or disabled toilets, and so on. In the virtual or the digital environment, it's not as visually present. So the things that we do and the work that we do is not kind of as commonly known or visually seen, but there are similarities in the approach. So I just want to kick off with some dot points around how do we get into this mess of being in the inaccessible web. I read an article about 3 years ago, which was called The Inaccessible Web, and it was really great, a really great eye-opener to get me thinking about the reason why we're wanting to do more work in the space of web accessibility. And I'll just run through those 3 dot points. So the first one, we can build websites and digital products without learning accessibility. And it's common. So there are different paths to get into the digital space. You might come from a tech background, or you might be a product owner, or whatever it might be. And often a lot of those paths are not concerned with learning anything about accessibility necessarily. The next point is we're not held accountable for inaccessible products. And I'll come back to that a little bit later on. And then the third one is assumptions guide us astray. So there's many, many assumptions and misconceptions around the topic of web accessibility, which I find daily. And I'm going to jump into a couple of those just before we get any further. So misconceptions. The one that I hear all the time is accessibility is only for blind people, which is disappointing. And we're going to talk about who it's for in a moment. Disabled people are all in wheelchairs. And I think the reason that we have, this is a common one, surprisingly, obviously you see people in wheelchairs and that's probably what you can picture in your mind, but there are many people that fall into this category, obviously that aren't in wheelchairs, that have other kinds of impairments or disabilities that are not as well known because you don't really see them. Another one that I get is, I don't know anyone with a disability, which I find odd because we all do. Maybe we haven't thought, maybe we don't realize it, maybe we haven't put a lot of thought into it, but we're going to unpack that one in a minute. Common ones in businesses is we don't have anyone like that using our website. So particularly in small business, that's a common one. If it's a smaller operation with a smaller budget, they tend to say that, well, you know, we don't have many people visiting the website. We don't have anyone with a disability or anyone like that using our website. Another common one is we don't have enough time or budget for accessibility. And I was reading an article this afternoon actually about the concept of accessibility shouldn't be something that you add on as an additional cost or it takes extra time. It should just be baked in, and we're going to unpack that with a diagram that I've got later on in the deck. And the last one is accessibility is only for government. So this is common because obviously if you've been around accessibility at all, you'll know that it's mandated that all government websites in Australia meet a particular level of compliance. And so some people have the misconception that it's only for government, and if they don't work with government, then they don't need to worry about accessibility, which is also incorrect. So misconceptions out of the way. And just to wrap up, it is a human right in Australia and around the world to access the web without exclusion. Better accessibility means better UX. So accessibility obviously falls under the umbrella of user experience. And we have standards that we should be working towards, which I'll unpack a bit further down. But before I get into the standards, the topic I want to jump onto first is who are we talking about? So obviously it's not just people in wheelchairs or not just blind people. People with disabilities refers to many groups of people who identify as having limited or impaired abilities. And they fall loosely into three groups: physical impairments, cognitive, or situational. So let me just jump into those one at a time. Physical is the things that we may think of more commonly. So visual and hearing, including low vision, color blindness, other forms of poor eyesight, for example, wearing glasses. Mobility, including difficulty or inability to use the hands, tremors, muscle slowness, loss of muscle control, that kind of thing. For example, the elderly. Cognitive and intellectual is the form of disability or impairment that people don't think of as much. It includes learning disabilities like dyslexia, cognitive disabilities affecting memory, attention, problem solving, and logic skills. I'm doing a couple of pieces of work at the moment for Dementia Australia, and they know their user group quite well, and they interact with people with lived experience. And so it's been an interesting piece of work, working with people that have memory issues and cognitive disabilities. And the third group just some stats before I go on. About 1 in 5, the Bureau of Statistics in 2016 told us about 1 in 5 Australians identify as disabled, so about almost 20%. But another interesting stat that's worth mentioning is almost 50% of Australians weren't born here, or their parents weren't born here. What I mean by that is first or second generation Australians. And that's a substantial statistic. And the reason I bring that up, it doesn't relate to disability, but it means that there are a large portion of our users that we need to consider have either low English or different literacy levels to what we might think. They may have different access to tech. They may have a different social background where they don't have the same experiences or privileges that we might have here. And so when you sort of think about the broader group of people that we're encountering in the space of web accessibility, it's a lot more than just the niche of the blind people or the people in wheelchairs. The third group is situational and temporary. So this means people that are in situations that limit their ability to hear, see, or use their hands, concentrate, etc. Sometimes they're using devices that have a limitation on size or input, like touch, for example. And so some examples of situational and temporary are in this diagram, which I borrowed from Microsoft. So it might be that a permanent is permanent disfigurement, like a one arm. Temporary might be you've got a sprained wrist or a broken arm. And the situational means that you might have your newborn on your hip. And in the bottom right-hand corner there, distracted driver. So obviously we've all been there where we're trying to park the car and we have to turn the stereo down because we're distracted and there's too many things going on and it's affecting our cognitive abilities. So that doesn't mean that we identify as being disabled. It just means we're in a particular situation that's temporary. Okay, so just wrapping up on the people that we're considering here. People access the web with a range of abilities. Access can be across a range of devices and in a variety of situations. And we should consider a broad spectrum of use cases. So I'll move on to what. Web accessibility, in my mind, falls under the umbrella of UX broadly. But as I said, it's a specific craft in itself for which we have a set of guidelines that have been developed that we can follow. There are a number of different guidelines and standards. The ones that are commonly used in Australia is the WCAG guidelines, which, given the length of this presentation, I'm not going to go into in great detail, but I do want to unpack a little bit the guidelines just so that you've got, if you haven't seen them or been thinking about them before, you have got some of the key vocab or language in your mind. So web accessibility, web content accessibility guidelines, or WCAG, represent the most comprehensive and authoritative international benchmark. Certainly we use them here as the benchmark. There's different levels, which I'll unpack in a second. And as I said before, the Australian government mandated that all government sites need to reach that level of compliance. Just before I go on, web content accessibility, if you hadn't sort of unpacked that and thought about it in detail before, by web content, we mean everything on the web. So that's actual content like copywriting and media, like images and videos, but it's also anything else that's on the web. So the functionality, the tech that's going on in the background, and it's across web apps and so on. So web content in this context means anything on the web. WCAG is a great set of guidelines. If you haven't been around accessibility before, I don't recommend that you go and rush out and start reading the WCAG guidelines. It's a long and involved document, which even people who have been around it for a long time still get confused by, but I'm going to summarize it here. It falls into three broad areas. Visual design, obviously, is the look and feel. Content, meaning text, images, and video, etc. And then functionality, so what's happening under the hood, how do the page elements actually function. WCAG breaks down their 60-odd guidelines into four main principles. So the principles are perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And I've been around accessibility for years now, and I only realized the other day when someone pointed out to me that those four principles spell poor when you when you put them together. So you learn something new every day. But I'm just going to go through those really quickly so we kind of get a broad understanding. Perceivable is all about the senses people use when they're browsing the web. So some users may have difficulties with one or more of their senses, making them reliant on assistive technology. So this is the kinds of people who can't see or hear or perceive the website or the web using their senses. Examples of things that we need to do to accommodate or the criteria under this principle is providing text alternatives for or alt text for images. That's a common one that people have usually heard of. Provide captions or other alternatives for video. And it's becoming more common these days to use closed captions. And obviously finding ways to make it easier for users to see and hear content. So things like contrast and so on. So these are the kinds of things that you might have heard about. The next one, second principle is operable. So operable is about the actions people take. And it's more to do with actually operating the website. Some people have motor difficulties, which means they can't use the keyboard, for example. They have to use the keyboard, I should say. So for example, people who have a sight impairment or a mobility impairment who can't or don't want to use a mouse often have to operate the website in a different way. So that falls under operable. Couple of key points under this is make all functionality available from the keyboard. And you'd be surprised how often we do audits and I have chats to people building websites who don't know about this level of accessibility, and they're doing not adhering to low-hanging fruit. So things like we did an audit recently of a website where they had a drop-down menu for the main nav, but the menu couldn't be expanded using the keyboard only, which means that most of the website wasn't accessible by way of you just simply couldn't get to any of it if you were only using the keyboard. Another one under the principle of operable is give users enough time to read and use content, help users navigate and find content. The give enough time is, for example, if you've got a carousel or a slideshow and the slides are moving past too quickly, a person might not have time to consume the content in that slide. And so you either need to slow it down or give them options to pause or stop. Those are a couple of examples. Let's move on to understandable. Understandable is a bit different to the other two. It's more to do with the content. So meaning your website must use clear terms, have simple instructions, and explain complex issues. So make the website function in a way that users will understand. So avoiding unusual or unexpected or inconsistent functions. I worked on a project years ago for a medium-sized private hospital, and they showed me the wireframes that they had put together, and they decided that the main navigation needed to be down the right-hand side of the page, and which is not what people were expecting. And when I asked, why are you doing that? They said, oh, we want to try something different. So that's a good example of don't try something different. It's not time to do that. And obviously, Adrienne will talk more about the way to design the language and not using jargon and so on. A couple of examples under here is make text readable and understandable. Make content appear and operate in predictable ways, as I said. Help users avoid and correct mistakes. So big part of web accessibility is dealing with forms, making sure that people understand how to complete the form, giving them instructions, not asking for things that are too complex, and certainly helping them when they've made an error. So prompting them and giving them examples and so on. The final principle is robust. So content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted by a wide variety of tech, including assistive technologies. So a robust website is one that third-party tech like browsers and screen readers can rely on. So obviously we're used to doing cross-browser testing and so on, but what I'm talking about here is paying attention to things like screen readers. And just on the topic of assistive tech, things like screen readers, speech recognition, subtitles. If these technologies can't access your website, neither can the users who are relying on them. So, and I'm going to talk about screen readers a bit further in the deck, but just one example I want to give you is I consume a lot of video content when I'm on the tram, or I used to catch the tram in the old days to get into work, and I watch a lot of videos. I don't have I don't usually wear my headphones, which means I rely on subtitles or closed captions on the videos, which is an assistive tech. And it's just because of my situation. It's not because I'm hearing impaired. But it means that if videos didn't have closed captions, then I wouldn't be able to access that content. So that's just an example of where assistive tech helps out for my particular situation. I left this diagram in. This is usually something I go into a lot more detail, but it helps you visualize the kind of breakdown of the WCAG principles. So there's the 4 principles. Under each principle, we have groupings of success criteria. And then below those success criteria have the different levels, which you may have heard of before. So level AA, for example, is the standard that government websites need to reach. Okay, so as I said, 3 levels. Level A is the most basic accessibility features. AA is intermediate and deals with the most common barriers. So that's where government need to be at. And level AAA is the highest and most complex level of accessibility. Not often do I see websites that get to this level, but it can be a good target to, even if you're mandated to go to AA, sometimes you can achieve some of the AAA criteria. So I've summarized and gone through very quickly the WCAG, and normally in a longer presentation I would dive into that stuff, but I know that I'm keeping it fairly high level and introductory for you guys. So just in summary, WCAG has 4 key principles, 3 levels of conformance, A, AA and AAA, and then there's testable success criteria under that, which used to be about 60 odd for WCAG 2.0. We now have WCAG 2.1. Which 2.1 includes all the original criteria from 2.0 with the addition of some extras. And I think that means we're up to about 90 or so criteria. Okay, so I'm going to go into where does it fit into the design cycle. I have this terrible diagram that I put together years ago. But there are different versions of this diagram. This is standard 5 boxes. It shows us the key elements that exist in most design cycles for digital. So we have in the first box, the business owner or a decision maker or a product owner, depending on the size of the project. Often we have other strategy and CX and research. And then we move into things that you know of. So creative, meaning visual design and copywriters, tech, so devs, and then QA at the end. Normally I would do a long spiel and talk to you about where in the process do we think accessibility should fall. So I'm just going to move the red arrow around to kind of see if I can fool you into the wrong answer. But I can give it away that the answer is web accessibility should be a key principle adopted in decision making throughout the entire design cycle. And the reason I usually go through that diagram is that often you go through the whole process, you get to the testing phase, and the QA does accessibility testing. They come up with a long list of issues that need to be fixed, most of which have to go back to developers. And so by looking at that, you would say that accessibility falls on the testers to make sure that they're testing it before it goes out the door. But the testers would say actually it belongs to the devs because all the issues need to be fixed by the devs, which is sometimes right. Sometimes they're technical issues, but often the devs will say, well, some of these issues were, we only built what we were told by the designs, the mock-ups, things like where to locate things on the page or what colors of contrast to use and so on. They must be decisions that the design team made. So it sort of floats back down through that diagram. I'm just going to go back to the diagram for 1 sec so I can make a point. That one. So the older way of thinking, or more traditional way of thinking, is that accessibility falls on the right, towards the right-hand end of the diagram. And actually it falls towards the left. And there's a bit of a saying in the web accessibility world that the more that we can shift the conversation of web accessibility to the left in the diagram, means the better success we'll have, because we're sort of baking it in right through the process. So if it's written into and agreed in the requirements right from the start, and the business owner or decision maker is on board, then the creatives know what they're aiming for, and they know what they've got a set of dot points or a cheat sheet that they can work towards. And then once they've designed something, it goes to the tech, and the tech are the same. They know exactly what they're aiming for, and so on. So that when you get down to the testing end of the scale, there should be a lot less work and a lot less issues to fix because everyone was on the same page from the beginning. So users with varied and limited abilities should be included in the decision making throughout the entire design cycle. So when you're doing user testing or you're doing ideation or whatever the process is that you're going through, you need to make sure that you have a broad spectrum of different users with different abilities and experiences, and a whole range of things, levels of literacy, cognitive impairments, and so on. This is not always possible. But certainly it is worthwhile thinking about having those varied inputs rather than just the one guy who's the UX expert or the one guy who's the tech lead. Okay, so I chopped a whole bunch of stuff out, but I've kept assistive technology in because I want to talk to you guys about that. I think it's one of the most relevant points in terms of web accessibility when it comes to chatbots. So I'm just going to run through real quick. Firstly, what is a screen reader? So whether or not you guys have had experience with screen readers, I don't know. A screen reader is a tool that helps users with impairments interact with computers more easily. So not just in the browser, but people who use screen readers use them for their whole computing experience, whether it's on desktop or mobile. Users interact with a screen reader usually by using the keyboard. That's the common way to drive a screen reader. And the screen reader can obviously be directed to do a variety of things, including read text, but also locate items on a page or give a summary or read out the headings, that kind of thing. People that use screen readers are actually a whole varied group. So certainly blind, low vision, visually impaired, but also other groups of people. So cognitive impairments like dyslexia or ADHD find it easier to process information if the screen reader is kind of helping them through. So screen readers can approach a page that might have a lot of visual clutter and kind of can sift through that and break down. You can set your shortcuts for your screen reader to just read you out the headings or give you a summary of what's on the page. And sometimes for people with cognitive impairments, that's a great way to move around the web. Also, obviously, people with physical impairments. So if you're not able to use a mouse or you're not using a mouse, then using a screen reader and using the keyboard to navigate around is also can make the web more accessible. A couple of things that we normally, some examples of things we consider when we're designing to use for a screen reader. Images having alt texts, for example, so that a screen reader can read to the user what's happening in the image. Using headings correctly in a structured way, making link text descriptive, so don't do things like click here or read more. Making sure that obviously the website is keyboard accessible with no issues, so there's no keyboard traps or issues with moving around. And that example I gave before where the drop-down navigation wasn't accessible to the keyboard. So obviously that's an issue because then the screen reader can't inform the person what those pages are either. And a big one obviously is form labels and errors. So being able to navigate your way around a form using the keyboard only and using a screen reader if you can't see the form, that's a big area of focus in the world of web accessibility. I've got a list of common screen readers here. One of the exercises that I do with groups when we do this as a 3-hour workshop is when we were doing it in real life. Seems like a long time ago, but when we used to do these in real life, we would actually turn the projector off or unplug the cord and see if we could navigate a website without the screen, just using the screen reader. And for people that haven't used a screen reader before, it's a confronting experience. Screen readers tend to, until you get used to them, tend to yell lots of things at you. And it's quite difficult without being able to see the screen to decipher where you need to go next or where the button is or which menu item you need. So I recommend to all of you, if you haven't had experience with a screen reader, go and download a free one. I use most commonly NVDA on Windows or TalkBack on my Android phone for testing. Download them, they're free. And see if you can navigate a site that you know well. So something that you're used to navigating daily. See if you can navigate that site using a screen reader. It's a very, very different experience and confronting for some people. And particularly if you're building or working with bots, maybe take the extra step and see if you can interact with the bot using a screen reader. Okay, so the last point that I wanted to touch on is I've just added in a few extra slides this afternoon around implementation and just some key things to think of around web accessibility in relation to chatbots. And these are in no particular order. The first one that seems to be common in the reading that I'm doing is provide an alternative. And that's up there at number 1. So regardless of how well you think the bot that you've built is going to work, always provide an alternative so that if it doesn't work or there's an issue or it's not accessible in the way you thought, that people have an alternative or a fallback, particularly for a contact us, for example. So obviously the tool should be useful and not an obstacle. So if it is an obstacle, make sure there's a fallback. Use a customizable platform. And this seems to be a common recommendation that obviously chatbot platforms may claim to be accessible or reach a certain standard, but often you're better off making sure that you're working with something that's customizable, particularly something that allows you to create your own UI using HTML and CSS. That way you've got control over some of those key things that you need to in terms of making the interface more accessible. A couple of things to be mindful of screen readers and keyboard nav. So firstly, if your chatbot is located in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, that's the last place that the screen reader will get to after you've been past all the other page elements. So that being the case, you might consider using a skip to chat. And that way that when the person arrives on the page, or even if they've been on the page and they need to get back to the conversation, they can get there easily without having to tab or use the keyboard to get all the way through every single component on the page, essentially down to the bottom right-hand corner. The kinds of things that we like to see in web pages in general also apply into bots. So using accessible language, fonts, color contrast, all those kinds of decisions that you would make throughout the website itself need to flow through into the bot. There's no point having a highly accessible and great website from a web accessibility point of view and then failing on some of those things in your bot implementation. This one's a little bit more tech, but announcing updates and making the chat history accessible. So using ARIA labels, including ARIA Live, labeling each response in the conversation as either from the user or from the chatbot, and giving context using the correct labels in the way that you implement the bot, and allow users to access the history or transcript using the keyboard. Again, there's certain ways to implement so that, which I'm not going to dive into, which just mean that the bot will be accessible to a screen reader or someone using a keyboard only. And the last one is make rich media accessible. So obviously these days, bots are not just text conversations. There's so much going on in a bot conversation. There's buttons, there's other rich media like videos, maybe downloads, maybe images, that sort of thing. So don't lose sight of those in terms of the accessibility requirements as well. So if there's going to be a video, make sure that video is accessible, it has closed captions, etc. If there's buttons, make sure there's alt text and so on, so that anything that you're doing with media inside of the bot is also ticking those accessibility criteria in the same way that you would do across the rest of the website. So that actually brings me to the finish line. And because I went at a breakneck speed, I've surprised myself and I've come in a few minutes early.
Well, Chris, we have a lot of questions, so don't worry about this.
I'm hoping that all that did was create more questions and answers, which I look forward to in the panel. And obviously, that was certainly a very introductory, high-level whirlwind conversation about web accessibility and how it might relate to the bot space. And obviously, we're going to hear more from Adrienne now about the topic of content, and then we can unpack more of the accessibility during the question time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. By the way, we still have like 5-10 minutes, so I suggest maybe we can answer some of the questions right now, so we haven't forgotten yet what you talked to us about. So
sure.
Let's just take 3-4 questions. So the first question, Dennis, would you like to share it?
I can't recall what I asked.
You asked, aside from learning the ins and outs of accessibility, how else might one assess their products for compliance and recommendations to meet?
Good question. I often get the question of where do I start? And as I said before, I don't recommend starting with the WCAG criteria. They can be quite tricky, and you'll open the WCAG criteria and get bored of it straight away, and then you'll never come back to accessibility. Instead, there's plenty of content on the web that you can consume. So start at the bottom. There's lots of quick how-to guides or how to get started, how to address low-hanging fruit. What are the big ticket items? There's things like what are the first 5 things I should do. So I would certainly suggest starting with the easy stuff, and I always suggest approaching things in a strategic way. So don't just barrel in and kind of say we need to fix. We found all these issues, and we just need to fix everything. If you're going to be, making a start, look at what the issues are, and then sort of prioritize them. So say these are the things that have a high impact, and we should fix immediately, or these are the things that are not having a high impact, and we can push those to later. So certainly start right at the start with the easy stuff.
Great tips. I think for many in this space, it's kind of like, well, we're busily working and building bots and chatbots, and it's like, accessibility, unfortunately, does fall to one of those later considerations, although these sessions are meant to bring the topic forward. And I think knowing how to go about finding ways to assess it and learn about it and make sure it's inclusive, to make sure it's a better experience, I think is a good question to answer. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the second question we have from Wasim. It's a tough one, so let's try. Any rough estimate of what will be the percentage of extra effort going to an end-to-end web design project to bring it to level A, AA, and AAA standards?
That's such a good question. So I'd like to argue that in many cases, there's no extra effort. And possibly there should be less effort. And I'll explain that in that sometimes it's just about having those conversations early on and making decisions about what level you want to reach, and not necessarily just saying we're going to reach level A or AA, but actually diving into what that means. So look at the criteria, work out which ones you can address and which ones you can't, and the ones that you are going to address, talk about how you're going to address them. So what does success look like? And often it can be, if you're doing it in that manner, it can be baked in a way where it's not going to cost you more time or effort or dollars. It just means making those decisions along the way. And so just going back to that example of the website that I did the audit recently, where their drop-down menu was not keyboard accessible. That's one very small minor issue, but it has a huge impact because there's a whole range of people that then just simply can't access most of that website. And that would be a really easy fix, and certainly is not something that would cost more time or effort. It's just the devs could have implemented that slightly differently if they had have known that that's what they were aiming for. So that's the first part of the argument. And certainly there are other things that will be more time consuming and more costly. So for example, I'm working on a project at the moment where we're rebuilding videos to make them accessible, and we're adding closed captions. So that means that the client had to sort of have a keen interest in making those or an appetite to make those videos accessible and spend the extra money and extra time on setting up the closed captions. So some of the stuff I argue that it doesn't take more time or effort, but certainly some of the things do.
Yeah.
So it's a very how long is a piece of string kind of question.
Yeah, but Chris, is it like you need a specialist in this area, or all you need is just to go to this website and follow the standards? Because if you do need a specialist, it means there will be additional efforts or like additional money to spend. How would you approach this?
True. I often recommend involving a specialist, even if it's simply to point you in the right direction at a minimum, or I guess the next level up from there would be to do a bit of hand holding through the process to make sure that you're bringing your knowledge up to speed quicker. And I think that if you involve an expert, even though you may look at it as being an expense, actually in the long run, it means that you've learned things quicker and you haven't made the mistakes, which means that you've kind of, you're kind of making that money back. But certainly, as I said before, if you don't want to commit to having an expert, then do some of that entry-level reading around how to get started. What are the first five things we should know, that kind of stuff. And then you may end up getting to a point where you need an expert to come in and help you actually address some of those things that you found.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. One more question, Dennis, from you as well. Where can we find users to test our designs with accessibility in mind?
That's a good question. So there are, there's a number of consultancies that I've worked with that have built their own pool of users that they do user testing with, and they can, that's a service that you can invest in. And certainly, so people with lived experience, and whether it's vision impaired people or whether it's people with cognitive issues, or we're doing some user testing at the moment with people with lived experience in dementia. And we're keeping those sessions very short, because people with lived experience of dementia tend to burn out really easily when you start asking them lots and lots of questions. So it depends on the users that you want to approach, but certainly there are now growing numbers of groups that you can access that where you can work with people with lived experience.
Okay, I think we have a few more questions that, Bora, I think you will take on a panel if you could. So yeah, because we run out of time for this presentation. Okay, thank you very much, Chris.
No worries.
Very interesting one, and something that you typically don't think about it, but it's extremely important piece. Especially you mentioned like 1 in 5 Australians are disabled, which means it's 20% of your clients might just not be able to actually access anything if you just didn't think about it. And it's so easy, it might be to fix, especially with these chat windows, because chatbot is itself probably accessibility feature that can help you to navigate through your website. And if you put it in the bottom right corner and it will take too much just to wait when it appears, then it's already a problem. Yep. So thank you for this insight. Perfect.
No worries.
Okay. Now, Adrienne, all attention to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I will do like the fun navigation on trying to get my screens to work and share the right thing. All right, and I'm just going to move a few things, so bear with me one moment.
Looks like the right screen.
Excellent, that's what I like to hear, because otherwise it'd just be really awkward. All right, bear with me while I get myself all sorted. All right, so content writing for chatbots. So who am I? My name is Adrienne, but you're probably wondering what a digital product owner has to do with content writing and chatbots. So my previous life, before I was a product owner, I dealt with chatbots and I did conversational design. So a lot of what I was doing was centered around doing that design, what that actually looked like, how it all came together, and making sure that the designs themselves made sense. So bear with me because I'm losing some of my details. I'm really well prepared, aren't I? So we'll carry on. So I would assume that most people think that all chatbots are created equal, right? So if you've written one, you've written them all. But that's not quite the case. Because when you are building your bot, they need to be thought of as the very best agent that is in your call center or in your business. You need to make sure that you are writing them as the absolute pillar of your customer contacts. So how do you actually start? What do you actually do to write for a chatbot? Well, there's the good. So this here is Vicky. Vicky is from Service Victoria, and she helps a lot of Victorians with a lot of different things, such as how can I get a fishing license? How much does it cost for an ambulance? Can I get a working with children's check? She helps with a range of things. Right here, we can see that Vicky is actually helping a customer and is keeping context as she moves through. So a customer doesn't have to keep asking the same sort of questions. But she also has the ability to do some context switching. In this, you can see that Vicky's been designed in a certain way, which allows you to start at the top of a decision tree and work your way through, as well as change your mind, allowing the customer then to be in the driver's seat of the conversation. Another example is Dom here. Dom allows you to actually order yourself a pizza in one hit by doing slot filling. So this is a really easy way of doing it and allowing a customer to really navigate through very quickly through a chatbot experience. Then there's some not so good. Siri. Most people have used Siri or had some form of interaction with Siri. And you can see here, although she's really trying, and we can see where she's trying to get to, she has just missed the mark. Poncho here has a lot of attitude, got a lot of personality, really, really strong. But as soon as the user themselves puts in a little bit of a curveball, all things go a little bit crazy. In addition, Poncho's personality actually gets to a point where it becomes a little bit infuriating for the customer. Heston is obviously created just to really show customers episodes. And then when a customer is actually trying to ask additional questions, Heston really struggles with this. This is a really good example of people diving in too quickly and trying to get a bot out into production without really thinking about the consequences of what a poorly designed or poorly implemented bot with grammar behind it is going to look like. Here's just another example as a good versus bad side by side. So we can see here our literally named bad bot is not very good at taking those multiple bits of entry like we saw with Dom. And in this case, the customer has to continue to repeat themselves because this bad bot is asking for single level interaction. Ask, answer, ask, answer. The second version is showing that the bot is allowed for those multiple entries and has collated them all into one final response. So you can see there's a couple of different ways that things can be done. There are ways in which both of these things can work if implemented properly and really thought about. So is the content writing really that different for chatbots? Yes, it really is. So not all mediums are the same. One of the big issues I've seen in the past is people thinking that the website information is exactly the same as what should be in the knowledge base, is the same as what should be in the chatbot itself, or in your voice, or anywhere. That's not quite the case. Every medium needs to speak for itself, and every medium should be built to work for itself as well. So put it this way, let's have a think about if you're on a website and you're reading a block of information on this website and it doesn't make much sense. You're getting a little bit confused. Over on the side, you see a friendly little bot with ask for help. Okay, cool. Well, bot, if you're gonna give me some help, cool, I'm gonna ask the question. So you open up the bot and you ask the bot the question. What it does is it just takes exactly what you've seen already on the website and it regurgitates it back into the chat. Basically, a chatbot has just told you use it to suck eggs. And it's not a really great experience. So you really need to write your bot information a little bit different to how you are with your other mediums. The other thing is there's a common misconception that we're actually trying to replace one digital asset with another. And that's not the case. A chatbot or a website or anything like that, they should actually work cohesively with one another, and they should complement each other rather than conflict. Another example about writing content, a little bit different to how you might on your website. If you think of any voice type thing, like a smart speaker. So I've got a Google Home here. If I ask it a question, it's only going to give me a short snippet of information, enough before I just stop listening or just tell it to be quiet, or when my kids decide that they've stopped listening to Google. And what it will then do is it'll send me a link to my phone. So if I want to do my own research later, I can. And I have that availability by using multiple mediums. And that's where we should be really looking at when we're writing content, thinking about that medium and thinking about how it can cohesively work with your other digital assets that are with it. But first and foremost, you'll see that a lot of what I think when it comes to actually writing content is not just about the writing. It's about a lot of things that you need to think about beforehand, and that all comes together into what your content's going to look like. So you need to understand your business, look at your brand guidelines, understand your tone. There may be times where you have multiple people writing the content, or over time have multiple people writing content. The last thing you want is content obviously written by multiple people, because it doesn't seem cohesive from a user standpoint. If you have a really clear understanding of what those brand guidelines look like, what the tone is going to be for the particular medium, in this case a chatbot, you can ensure that as you move forward, your that experience as it goes along for the customer starts to become a lot more consistent. You can also look at it and think about it being in a chat forum. So where your website might be very professional or very structured in the information that it's providing, your chatbot might be a little bit more laxed, a bit more friendlier, because it's a chat after all. If you're in Facebook, that might be Facebook Messenger, you might have another layer of relaxing when you come to your tone. So you've got to think of the different mediums and how that different chat experience should be. You think about the persona of the chatbot as well. So in this case, this is things like, are you actually going to name it? What's that going to look like? What's the tone within that? And that may, as I said, it may differ to your actual brand guidelines or your website or what have you. So really think about it, and do think about it as being that very best agent that you've got to represent your business, and how would you like them emulated. But number one, what is the actual objective of the chatbot? If your chat is there to perhaps displace your most common questions or really simple questions from the call center, the last thing you want to do is always offer a phone number. As an example, customer comes in, what are your opening hours? Chatbot responds, our opening hours are 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. Or you can call us on 13 blah, 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 blah to find out more about our opening hours. You've not necessarily displaced the calls, but you don't want to make it too hard for a customer to get in contact. So exactly what Chris is saying, you need to have levels of fallback. So let's say someone's contacting your chatbot for a compassionate reason. It might be a really good idea to ensure that potentially those customers have some way of actually speaking to a human in one way, shape or form. Live chat, phone, something along those lines. Or if, say, they've got a revenue opportunity, you might actually want to have those customers be escalated to a phone so that you can collect on that revenue opportunity. So there are a couple of reasons. So we shouldn't be looking necessarily on that, you know, remove all of the contacts from the contact center. It should be about a displacement and trying to get the right person to the right person at the right time and for the right reason. And all of these things, if you do your chatbot correctly, you can actually use them as a bit of a triage, and you can actually optimize the customer experience from a contact standpoint, because they're not going to, you know, this department and that department. They can potentially go to the right person straight away, have their query resolved, and at the end, it's a good experience. A lot of people really are focused on that removal of calls. And it's one of those things that I want, and I encourage people to really think about that. when you're thinking about chats, you should be looking at your overall interactions with the business. And when you've got a chatbot, actually your overall interactions should increase. So if you think about all of your different mediums, you want to have more touch points for your customers. And this allows customers to then have that availability to interact with your business on different levels and get that really optimal experience. You also need to understand your audience. So I'm sure that this is not news to anyone, but one of the biggest things is not to use jargon in your chatbot. If it's going out to your everyday person, you don't want to use jargon, and you don't want to have information that's way too complex for your average person to understand. Some people give their content to their parents or their non-technical friends or what have you, to have a read through it and see if it actually makes sense to them. It's a really good checkpoint. I've worked with businesses before where they would write content and it makes sense to them because they know it. But I look at it and I go, I actually have no idea what you're talking about. Can you explain it to me? And let's try and work together on what this actually is going to look like for a customer. So be really careful about those things and make sure it's simple. Customers are going to a chatbot because they want that short, concise, informative information where they can just get in, get it, and get out. You also need to have a think about why they're actually coming to that chatbot for help. So they're not going to come in there to ask exceptionally complex information. A lot of the times that's probably more something they're going to want to speak to someone about. But they want to get enough information to enable them to be able to carry on with their self-service journey or their website journey. So have a real think about why people are actually coming in and having those conversations with the chatbot. Really understand your audience. On another level, if, however, your audience is someone who's going to understand that complex information, then 100% put it in. Alternatively, you may decide to use your chatbot or part of your chatbot for internal uses to maybe help with your level up of new agents on the phone, things like that. In those cases, jargon, go for it. Internal links, internal information, 100%. It's a great idea. So the first thing you want to think about when you're actually writing is how you're actually going to introduce your bot. So you need to have a think about how are you going to position it. Introducing your bot is a really great idea because this can help frame it to the customers that are going to come in and use it. So not only can it introduce the bot to the user as if, when you call the contact center, normally the person on the other end will go, thank you for calling ABC. This is Adrienne. It's a little bit of an introduction, but it can also really frame what that discussion is going to be and the conversation and really help drive the customer to be asking the correct types of questions for your bot. So there are a few different ways that you can probably introduce your bot. One of them is a real guided solution. So this example, you can see that they've introduced the bot itself and then provided a specific list of topics and buttons for a customer to select from. So this is quite a guided conversation. This one here is a little bit more structured in ensuring that we're going down a level of decision tree. I did like that this particular bot was called Jeeves, so that made my day. This one here is a little bit more free form. So it's still telling you about what it's here for. So in this case, Cass is talking about questions about your drones and where you can say fly. And you'll notice also that in the input box, it's got leading text. So this also helps to provide the customer a little bit more guidance about what types of questions are really relevant for this particular chatbot. Or you can go for completely open source. So Jess here doesn't necessarily say too much other than I'm here to help you about Jetstar and really open forum questions. So this is, you'd probably want to have pretty strong NLU in making sure that as a customer is asking a whole range of questions, that your chat's really able to handle them. One of the things that we need to think about is using what you've got. So we talked about using the website and your digital assets and having them being complementary of one another. So in this case, the customers are going to really look for you to know, your chatbot to know what they've been doing perhaps within the website. So in this case, we can see that a customer is wanting to get information about their tracking for a particular parcel. And it's really obvious here that they've already put the information into the screen, but then they're having to redo it. So the chatbot itself is almost a completely separate digital asset to where it's sitting, which is not a great experience for the customer. In this day and age with digital, we're really looking to have that connection and almost like that asynchronous, you know, conversation between multiple mediums. So on the opposite hand, and this is my own personal experience the other day using AusPost, and you can see here that it's really quick and easy. I can tell you that behind the scenes, the design work on this was a little bit more complicated than how it comes out here to the user, but that's obviously the beauty of one of these things. So what I had done is I had actually put in my tracking number already into the website to emulate similarly what we've seen in that previous example. I asked the same question, where's my parcel? What the bot's doing is just asking me, it's just confirming, do I want to check this parcel or another one? Which allows me to, well, if I've already looked at it potentially on the screen, I, you know, don't want to know about that one, but I want to ask about another parcel. So I had that opportunity, chose this parcel, and it gave me the information. Again, it didn't just regurgitate exactly what I was seeing. It gave me information about my parcel. It gave me links to show me more about what my status actually means and additional information if I required it. So really anticipating a bit of my needs there. And that was a really simple way of being able to use the information that we had and being able to personalize my experience just that little bit. So what are some ways to personalize? Because there seems to be this preconception that the best way to personalize something is to make sure you have absolutely all of the information about the customer, i.e. they have to be authenticated. So you know their account balances and their names and their cat and what they had for breakfast yesterday for you to really provide a fabulous personal experience. And that's not quite the case. So you can use where the customer is on your website. So let's say you're a business that has multiple areas. We can even use Service Victoria like we were talking about earlier. If I'm on the ambulance page, right, I might say, well, what's the cost? We can have a little bit of an assumption there that a customer is wanting to know what's the cost of an ambulance membership, because that's the page that I'm on. And so we can utilize that to really personalize the experience for that customer. Instead of asking them, well, what do you want to necessarily know about the cost of? We can use where they actually are to try and optimize that experience. We can look at the previous interactions that they've had with the chatbot, again, using potentially context where we've been able to keep the context of it and travel that through as a customer asks additional questions along the lines. Remembering a chat conversation is not necessarily linear. It's not going to go from A to B to C. A customer might, you know, jut around and ask multiple questions everywhere. We can talk about the location of the user. So whether this is different states, different countries, things like that. That can also help. So this can be, let's say you've got different phone numbers for a customer to be able to contact based on their location. This is one of the great ways in which you can personalize it in saying to a customer, well, because you're in, say, Victoria, here's the phone number for you. Of course, there is authentication. So if you are an authenticated bot, we do have that level of information. 100% use it to the advantage where you can. Names, account details, things like that. You can really help to personalize that content for the customer. You can also look at potentially their journey before they got to the bot. So in some cases, you might actually see, oh, well, they've traveled from this page to this page and they went back out and they've come back in, and you know, you might be able to use the tracking of where a customer has been and then use their question to be able to personalize some of the content in which the customer might use. And also the medium. So again, let's have a think about if they're on their mobile and what experience that potentially might want to be, as opposed to being on a website or Messenger or WhatsApp or whatever it happens to be, the potential medium that the customer is interacting with your bot on can really change what that looks like. So look to personalize, potentially even by the medium that the customer is using. The other thing to be careful of is other strategies. So some technologies have underlying strategies that are utilized to make sure that, you know, you either round out your conversation or for incomprehension or even just for feedback. So you need to be really careful of what some of them will do. So here's an example. The user, how do I get to change my password? Your bot comes back, you can change your password anytime by going to your profile section. If you're locked out, simply click on forgot password and a link will be sent to your registered email. Let me know if you have any more questions. And then your underlying strategy comes in. Let me know if you have any more questions. The problem here is obviously we've got an underlying strategy conflicting with your actual content itself, and it can seem like your bot is being quite robotic, which is not what we want. We're after a conversational type piece. And this then requires, it looks like there's a lot of repeating and your bot looks a little bit dumb. In addition, we spoke about the feedback. And so the difference between a bot and potentially like a live chat is there's no clear end when it comes to a bot. So if we think about it, people won't necessarily say goodbye to a bot. I think I saw it very rarely when I'd look through thousands upon thousands of conversations. Additionally, a lot of people don't even close down the bot, or your UI might not allow them to close it down, might only be a minimize as an example. And in this case, there's no real end to the conversation. So it's about when are you asking for feedback? And it is a really important bit of information, especially when it comes to iterating and optimizing your chatbot. But you need to make sure that you're not too needy. The last thing you want is your bot at the end of every answer asking, do you like me? Did I do a good job? Please tell me I'm a good bot. So be really careful of how you're utilizing this strategy and when it's being implemented to ensure that you're not bombarding a customer throughout their entire journey with your bot. Watch your intros. So introducing any bit of your information is a really clever part of being a chatbot writer. So you need to be very creative in what you do and ensure that you're not repeating things over and over again. So we've obviously got a few different ways in which we will respond to a customer. So there's a direct answer. This is pretty straightforward, right? There's your customer asks a question, bot gives you an answer. Really straightforward, really easy. What you want to do is you want to make sure your direct answer, number one, has something in there to give the customer comfort that you have understood their question. So as an example, if a customer, say, for example, says, can I get an application? The last thing you want is your chatbot to just respond with yes and a link. It's not very great, right? So you want to make sure that the answer that is given is a little bit more informative. Think back to when we were learning English in school, where you couldn't just answer the question, you had to put the question in your answer. Same sort of deal. So it needs to be something like, you know, you can apply, you know, here is the application that you're after, or something along those lines. You need to make sure that it rolls into it. But be careful. So there are some cases where people start a lot of their direct answers with things like, I can help with ABC, or I understand you want to know more about 1, 2, 3. And if you start to do that, that sounds good at the beginning, but then when it's on every answer or on multiple answers, and as a customer again navigates however they want through your chatbot, that can become a really repetitive thing for a customer. When we think about decision trees as well, you know, we saw before where we had Vicky sort of jumping through decision trees. Normally they're built, as a designer, you would normally build a decision tree from the top down. So you want to make sure a customer can come in with absolutely nothing, so just the base level intent, and be able to navigate through your decision tree, versus a customer that might give you a whole heap of information and be able to jump from start to finish, and then a mixture of both. So each of those option nodes that your decision tree might be built with, they need to have enough of an intro that makes sense as a customer goes through it, and to allow for all of those different journeys, regardless of what the customer gives you. So we really need to think about what those decision trees are going to look like. So let's order a coffee. Here's an example of a full decision tree. So I'd like to order a coffee. Your bot's going to come back. What kind of coffee do you want? Latte. All right, but any kind of special milk you'd like? User, skinny, thanks. But any sugars to go with your latte? Just the one, thanks. But sure, so to confirm, you'd like a skinny latte with 1 sugar. User, yep, but done. Your order will be ready in 10 minutes. Cool, so that's top to bottom, all of our boxes ticked. Okay, so let's do a one shot. So same decision tree, same design, different interaction. User, can I get a skinny latte with 1 sugar? But sure, you want to, just to confirm, you want a skinny latte and 1 sugar. User, yep, but done. It'll be ready in 10 minutes. You see that the bot, what it's saying makes sense, regardless of where the customer has come from and how their journey is. It's the one simple design, but we have been able to cater for 2 conversations so far. Let's go one more. Want to have a little bit of both. User, I'd like to order a latte, but would you like any special kind of milk? Skinny and with 1 sugar. Sure, so to confirm, you'd like a skinny latte with 1 sugar. User, yep, but done. Your order will be ready in 10 minutes. Making sure that you do these sorts of designs cleverly from the start and really think about them and how it's going to interact at each level will make sure that you really provide an optimal solution for your customers as you move forward. Think of it almost like a builder, right? Measure twice, cut once. That's what we want to be looking at when we're talking about bots and the content and how we're putting it all together. What we also want to look at is trying to anticipate questions from customers. So we want to try and remove the customer having to do all of the work, right? So we want to make sure that as a bot, we have a rough idea of what you're trying to say. One of the big things I've seen is people thinking, well, the more intents that I have in my bot, the smarter my bot is, which is not the case. It's about being smart about your information, ensuring that your grammar is really going to work for you and not against you. So in this case, think about real estate, but where possible, try and group some of your information. Use links to jump customers from where you are now to relevant information, things like that. Cover where possible a number of topics within those intents where you can. So one of the things that we can look at is additional hints in your content to remove the need for the customer to ask, to have more questions. So you might look at doing a video, an embedded video as an example. But to Chris's point, make sure, if you want to make sure it's accessible, that it's a closed caption one for your customers. But this is a really great way to try and cut off people's questions about, well, how do I find my account number? For example, you might have a short video or even just some text that says your account number can be found on the top right-hand side of your bill. It's a good example. Here you can see that there's some relevant links that are provided as a part of the content. So this allows you to sort of look at it. It all makes sense as you're reading it on its own, plus there's links for you to be able to click around. Now these can be links to other bits of content that your chatbot has, or it could be external links into your website. Again, to Chris's point, when we're talking accessibility and links, you can't just do the simply click here for more information, as the screen readers just don't pick it up. So it does need to make sense. So you need to find that really nice balance between a link that makes sense as a part of your additional content. And from a screen reader standpoint, you don't want them to be too long. So the last thing you want to do is have your entire sentence, as an example, to be a link. So you want to take keywords that make sense. The other thing is you can provide out relevant links into your website or app as well. So it might be able to provide you with a few bits and pieces of information, and then options for a customer to continue to self-navigate, trying to remove those additional questions that they're having to ask, and making sure that your bot doesn't need to have really bespoke content for those 1 or 2 questions that may get asked. Don't have the links disrupt your flow. So when we are talking about links, as you said, we want to have them as a part of the content so they make sense. So an example like this, where it's just got a link put in there, it really removes that conversational aspect out of your content itself. A better way is to ensure that it is really a part of that conversation. Put yourself into the customer's shoes. Imagine actually sort of having that conversation yourself, and how would you want to be treated, and what would you want to see? This is a much better example of how you can use your links to be contained within your flow rather than really disrupt it and have that really jarring experience. So give your customers a kiss. Keep it simple, sweetheart. When we are talking about content, especially in the beginning, my advice is to start really, really simple. So one of the things that I used to say to a lot of customers is to start with your social aspects. So social or chit chat. This is a really great way to get content, the content juices flowing, having a really good understanding between a variation or your grammar and the actual intent. So let's say, you know, providing that example of, do you like food? What do you like doing? And what's something you enjoy? Can all be answered by one bit of content, which it could be something like, I like a lot of things, but my favorite thing is chatting to you. So all of those things can be used, and it's a really great way to start building up the business content and make it a lot sharper. So a lot of people do have a bit of fun with this. As an example, here's some chit chat examples. You can see there's a "you're cute," "thanks," I get it pretty often, to be honest. We've got a favorite type of food, and using a little bit of tech fun with a bite of microchips. Favorite food from our friend Vicky, and she's all about the Victorian cuisines. Not that we can enjoy them at the moment, but you know, normally. And you can see at the end we've got asking about holes in crumpets, and we're talking about English muffins and different transporting of spreads. So sometimes these can have little Easter eggs. They're a little bit of fun, and it gets to start when we're talking about the business itself. But what we want to do is we do want to build the bot over time. There needs to be a level of comfort that when your bot first becomes alive, it's only a baby. So you need to use the user to actually grow your custom, you know, grow your intent base and grow your content. To start really simple, question, answer, and then use the information that you're getting from customers to really start to prioritize your user journeys and what perhaps you want to grow and provide as a more optimal experience as you move along. Make sure that your answers are concise, and think about the real estate. Think most chatbots, you know, the UI is about the size of your phone itself. So you want to make sure that you're not going too overboard. They say that, you know, a person reading will read okay between 50 and 60 characters per line, which includes spaces. So also think of that UI and what that looks like. So we need to make sure that, you know, you're not losing the customer, because if you put everything, if you put too much information in one big blob, you will lose customers in that way. And just don't overdo it. You need to chunk your information, because we don't read necessarily, we kind of glance and pick up those cues. So matters. You can see here's a big chunk of information. It's a lot, and unless you're really, really focused, you're not going to take it in. And a lot of this, especially, you know, remember, why is your customer speaking to your chatbot? I just want to get some short, sharp information. I need to get in, I want to get out, and that's it, right? I'm busy. So formatting does matter. one of the things that we should be looking at is using bolds, italics, underlined, list, bullet points, put some paragraphs in there, things like that. It's a really great way of being able to break up the information and help a customer pick out that information they want to see. If you have a big chunk, sometimes your message can be lost and customers can assume your bot hasn't been able to answer them. Your other thing, you can always use bubbles. So they all come. But be careful a little bit with bubbles. You know, as Chris was mentioning before, you need to make sure that it's operable. So giving enough time for a customer or for, you know, the accessibility to be able to get through each of them. And the last thing you want is your bot to be pinging a customer constantly with a whole heap of bubbles, them having to scroll up, get the information. You know, side note, relative, my kids are on Messenger, Kids Messenger. And if my daughter gets on a run, I just end up with my phone going bing, 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 one message after another, and it's really annoying. So have a think of what that looks like if you are going to use bubbles as your breakup of information. To button or to not button. So this is one of the, I guess, newer things that have come through in the last couple of years when it comes to chatbot writing. Buttons are a really great thing, and they've come through a lot with customers, especially with using things like Messenger and the like. It's become a bit of a norm, but you need to be really careful. In the examples that we're seeing here, the bots obviously can't handle anything but the button. So you can only choose from here. It's a very linear and structured conversation, and the bot isn't anticipating any additional input. So in that case, if that's what your tech is going to be and that's what you're going to put in, that's fine, but disable your input text so that a customer has to actually choose from one of your options. If you're going to allow a customer to free text, which really is a more optimal experience, you need to make sure there's enough grammar sitting behind it and function within your tech to allow you to get through it all. Make sure that your experience is great. Doesn't matter what your tech allows or not allows, just make sure it is a really good experience. So how do we actually grow your intent base as we move forward? Use your user. It's as simple as that. Make sure that you look at your content, look at what people are doing, and growing your user base based on what most people are asking. So look at the information that can't be answered, group them, prioritize, and that's how you grow your intent base. Just because one person asks one question once, it does not cater for a content. You want to look at an 80-20 rule, and your content should cover 80% of the interactions and questions that are coming through. The biggest thing is to iterate. So analytics, conversation reviews, feedback, things like that, they are the goal to making sure your bot is going to be successful. I know I spoke earlier about being careful about feedback and having too many people, you know, do you like me? Do you like me? Do you like me? But that feedback can actually be really great, and more than negative feedback, which might seem a bit counterintuitive, but it really is one of the most positive ways in which you can get information, but you got to ask. So if someone doesn't give great feedback to your chatbot, which as Australians we tend to not, you want to know why. Is it because I didn't understand what you're asking? If yes, then bot needs better grammar or needs additional user new intent. Is it because you wanted more information than what I could offer you? Yes, okay, cool. But you need to increase the amount of content that you have or provide a little bit more detail, those sorts of things. But really, the first 2 to 4 weeks of your bot's life in that baby stage is where you're going to see the most optimization. But at the end of the day, your bot shouldn't stop ever learning. It should continue on, you know, each and every day, and it should continue to learn and use the user to learn those things. So, to summarize, and I'm sure that you're all so sick of hearing my voice, we want to measure twice, cut once. So if we go through that old adage, it really is about design, thought, process, and then building the content from there. The digital era doesn't allow us to have that much space to fail. And if we are going to fail, we need to fail fast. So we need to make sure that we really design it correctly and implement something great in the first instance, even if it's simple. Know your business, know your intent, know your objection, know your audience. So who you're writing for, and make sure that you are writing it for them. Don't have the mediums compete, but make sure they complement one another. Have them all work together as a cohesive unit. And keep it simple, sweetheart. Make sure that you start easy, do it well, and then build and iterate as you move forward, and make sure the customer journey is always a really easy one, because you don't want to make it complex, and continue to iterate. It is always going to be something that needs to change with the ebbs and flows of your customers. So thanks. I think I did okay on time. I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Just right on time. Thank you very much, Adrienne.
Excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very, very useful presentation. There is a couple of questions. So the one, probably difficult question from Henley. How do you deal with jargon when copy is typically appended with heavy legalese after going through legal?
Yeah, so there really is, especially from a government standpoint, I've seen this happen a lot where it does go through legal and what have you. I think that's a lot of working with the legal teams in getting them to really understand that from a customer point of view, because although you need it to be correct, yes, you want to make sure from a legal standpoint it is correct, you also need to make sure that the information is accessible and understood by the customer itself. So if your customers are not understanding what's going on, then your chatbot is not going to be successful. So there's trying to find that balance between legalese and customers actually understanding what's happening, which is the most important part.
Okay, thank you. Definitely not easy answer here. Yeah, absolutely. And one more question on the personalization topic from Luke. What about a bot that is intelligent enough to pull back on colloquial language where a user is clearly not a native speaker of the chatbot languages?
Yeah, look, I think with all of those things, it is trying to find that balance, and that's where that iteration comes in. If you are going to be colloquial and you're finding that your user base is not going to be responding well to it, then that's when you do need to pull it back and try and make it maybe less friendly, for lack of a better word. So potentially you might want to make it just that little bit more professional before it actually starts to make customer antagonize a customer. So it really is trying to find that balance between the professionalism, the friendliness, and also trying to like be hip with the audience that it's that you're dealing with. So no direct answer, I guess, but you know, trying to make sure that you work with it. But read the conversations. If you're starting to see that more and more customers are impacted by what your, you know, the type of content that is in there, that's when you really need to start to really think about it and go, actually, this isn't working for our customer base. And so we need to really pull back and make it something which is a bit more accessible for everyone.
Mm-hmm. But typically you won't create like two scripts for the chatbots to switch between colloquial and general. It would be like too expensive or hard to do.
Sometimes it can depend on your tech. So I have seen before where the same intent is created. So it's just a one block of intent, the one block of grammar being used, so the same NLU being used, but then the actual content itself is being changed based on the medium that someone's in. So on the website itself, it's got one particular level of content, then Facebook Messenger has another level of content, mobile app has another level of content, authentication has another level of content. So you can actually, you know, build it up in that manner if you really want to go down to that level for that level of personalization. So there are ways and means of doing it, but again, it's going to depend on your level of effort and your ROI. So is it really worth putting it in there or not? And if you can't easily segment those sorts of customers, then I wouldn't look to put in that level of effort because you may not get the return.
Okay. Thank you very much. There are a few other questions, but I guess we'll keep it towards the end of the session or for the panel. Thank you very much, and very, very useful.
Thank you.
Bora, so you handled the
Yes.
panel interview, so all to you.
Hello, thank you. I'm having some internet connection trouble, so if I'm gone, then that would be it. No, then I've sent some of the questions already before to the group, so yes, that hopefully everybody knows anyway what is going to happen. So yes, thank you for the speakers, and we've got also some additional guests that might maybe would be nice if the two of them would give a quick intro. Maybe Alissa, a quick one from your side.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name's Alissa, and I'm lead UX content at Australia Post. And I actually know Adrienne quite well. We've worked together on the Australia Post chatbot, so when she was in her old role. So it's nice to see you all.
And Katie?
Hi everyone, I'm Katie. I've worked on, generally I work with government chatbots, so internal and external facing, and also started out on the University of Canberra chatbot when they started out with Lucy. So totally get all the plain English and battling for user experience and making sure that governments don't use all of the legalese that they like to spread throughout their content.
Good. Thank you for nice for both of you to join as well into the panel. That's very nice of you. So my first question that I had, and maybe I'll hand that directly to you, Katie, while you're directly on screen there because you spoke last. What is your personal passion about the topic of content writing or accessibility, or whatever your main passion is, your main topic is?
Plain English writing. It's
awesome.
plain English across the board. So I'm married to an Italian, born in Australia, but didn't speak English until he hit primary school. So I've also worked with PhD students who English is not their first language. So just because you're writing in plain English doesn't mean you're writing for an audience that is stupid. You're also writing for people that just want to scan their information. People are kind of time poor. They want to get the information quickly. So you'll find even in chatbots, which is why what we said before, the formatting is so important so that people can go through and scan for the information that they want. So I'm really keen about making sure that English, plain English is used. And I've spent lots of my time in government departments using research to back up why we write the way we do and not the way they would like it to be done.
That's a good one. I like it very much. Alissa, yours.
Yeah, actually, my answer is very similar to Katie's. So my background is in content writing for universities. So much of what Chris spoke about early on in terms of the kinds of organisations that absolutely need to kind of toe the line when it comes to a CAG. Universities are right up there. So yeah, plain English writing is really important to me too. Not using kind of jargon or slang unless it's part of your brand, means that your content can be understood by a really broad audience, including people who have mixed abilities or English as a second language. So I think, writing in that way just it makes the web much more accessible for everyone.
Cool, thank you. And Adrienne, what is your personal passion? Why did you start in that field?
Look, I think as I sort of worked through it all, a lot of it was more about the customer experience. I would spend hours looking at customer conversations from multiple businesses and really seeing pain points and seeing how customers' interactions with chats and what impacted them. And so the more I delved into it, the more I really wanted to work on creating much better customer experiences, and not just within the chat, but as as that whole peripheral, that whole interaction with the business and what that looks like as a group. And I think that's really important, as we move forward in more and more digital, and especially now with COVID, where we've all got such this high reliance on, technology. I think having, that experience has probably been the biggest thing for me. And my biggest championing.
Fair enough. And Chris?
Yeah, so for me, accessibility, after being around for many, many years, working in different organizations and agency side as well as a BA, so working on projects with clients where we're, getting right into the requirements and the design of the digital product. And I just found that for me, over and over, the overall quality was lacking in that we weren't being inclusive and we weren't sort of thinking about all those different use cases. So I now sort of speak to the point that accessibility is a measure of quality. And so if we're thinking about being more accessible, we're making those decisions along the way through the design cycle, as I said, and we're being more inclusive, and we're thinking about the different situations and the different abilities and the different backgrounds and level of literacy and so on, then ultimately the digital products that we end up with are of a much higher quality. And I find that over and over again with the judging in the Web Awards, that those entrants that haven't considered web accessibility or haven't even considered the basics, or maybe they don't know the basics, tend to be of a much poorer quality end product than those that are up to speed and at least ticking some of those low-hanging fruit. So for me, it's really about the quality of being able to do better on the web. And I think that's really important at the moment, particularly now that people are shifting to digital channels more so than they were before, where some of the other channels are being, the more in-person channels are being limited or cut. So we need to do much better with digital, now more so than before. So that's me. Have we lost Bora?
No, I just forgot to unmute myself. So that's
okay.
A classic. So then, well, I've got you then directly on there. So what was a memorable learning or surprise or event or whatever that you had in regards to accessibility? Something which you, in a project or whatever happened or anywhere else where you're like, oh, wow, that's something that I didn't think of, or something, something that was memorable for you.
For me, the only thing that's coming to mind is I worked on a project for a large Australian retailer who I can't name, but we went through a whole process. Their website was, the UI was quite dated. I think it was 8 or 9 years since it had an overhaul, and the previous version was not responsive and not designed for e-commerce. So it was essentially a catalog at the time. So they went through a major overhaul in terms of UI and did a whole bunch of research and user testing and so on to kind of overhaul that page, which is a very high trafficked page. I think it was in the top 3 trafficked pages in Australia. And what stood out to me as being memorable is when they the design team came up with the end solution and presented it to the client, everyone was really happy. They also did an internal presentation in the agency and everyone was really happy. But the thing that stood out to me was that I said to them with the user testing, how did they, what were the criteria for selecting participants? And I was kind of prodding the beast a little bit because I knew the person leading the team and actually knew the answer. But they said that they obviously use an agency. They get, they ring up and they say we need 3 people to appear on Tuesday, whatever it might be. And actually when it came down to it, they had only had 4 people come in for user testing. So 3rd highest trafficked page in Australia, and went through a sizable redesign, and only 4 people came in to do actual user testing. And I said to him, what were the criteria for choosing those 4 people? Again, prodding the beast. And he said, oh, well, we just said that they need to have prior experience with this brand and they need to be within a certain age range. But that was it. So I said, the thing that was memorable for me was, why was there not more diversity? How could you possibly know how people with different experiences or abilities would interact with that new design if you only got 4 people in who were essentially me, a middle-aged white Australian, and you didn't consider anyone else in your testing. And so the end result was kind of okay, but also missed a huge opportunity there to kind of be more inclusive. And so that was certainly a memorable experience to be part of that project.
Yeah, okay, that's more negative memorable experience. Sometimes those things which really really hit you, where you like learned something, you're like, oh wow, yeah, never want to do that again. I definitely want to fight that battle much earlier to make that clear to everybody. So that was a good one, yes. So I'll mix it up a little bit. So I will get everybody, but I will, Katie maybe then.
So for content, the best fun is actually reading the chat logs and what people actually put into their chat fields and what they're asking the chatbot. A lot of it is also training the user about what your chatbot can answer, and perhaps not writing a half-page essay and expecting the chatbot to kind of pick out the key themes and answer the question that you want. But I worked with a veteran affairs organisation, and one of the key learnings there was, it goes back to those compassionate questions, learning when to say your chatbot's not going to be able to help you and provide that handoff so that they can talk to the human who can actually provide the level of assistance that they want. So clearly laying out that, you know, sorry, the chatbot can't help you. This is that 80-20 rule, this 20%, they're not going to be able to help you with these really difficult questions that really need a human assistance.
Fair enough. Good one. Alissa? Memorable moment for you?
Our memorable one, and I feel like sometimes this is kind of how we learn, is just by making a horrible mistake, which is something that we did do with our bot at Australia Post. So when it was very early on, the product owner wanted to increase engagement, so they decided to auto-invoke the bot after Adrienne's laughing. They decided to auto-invoke the bot after a certain number of seconds, which was then pulling the focus into the bot, so we'd get sort of half a tracking number or half a sentence or something really horrible like that. And so, yeah, obviously our engagement went up, but it also made our customers furious. And so, you know, we kind of learned, that, and we turned it off pretty quickly too, but we kind of learned that thing that Adrienne mentioned earlier, which is kind of that fine line between being helpful or just being totally needy and annoying, you know. So we went from being something that was quite useful to being like clippy, you know, and that's not what we want at all. It's not on brand for us. So so that was important, and you know, I guess the beauty of chatbots is that if you stuff it up, you can fix it pretty quickly. You know, it's all digital, so you know, we learn and we iterate. Yeah, that was actually you know, a bad thing that was quite helpful.
Fair enough. Admittedly, that was one of my learnings as well, that the nice part about chatbots is that you can much easier bring an update out than you can do for other things, mobile apps, whatever kind of stuff. You can fix it quicker. You can also stuff it up quicker, but you can also fix it quicker. So that's a good one. Adrienne, what was one of your big memorable moments in that space?
Well, definitely the one Alissa said, and it was one of those things that for forevermore, any proactive invitation, there was like a hard line, do not take focus. So that was one that was learned for forevermore after that. I remember coming into the office and looking at the stats and just like my head exploding. But I think in particular, I worked on a bot where there was 6 months that we were working to try and get it perfect for its initial launch. And there was a lot of, you know, user testing behind the scenes on like a beta site. And we thought we had it clean, and we thought we had a lot of information, and it was great and all the rest of it. And we launched, and day one, we realized that one of the top 3 questions for the bot, and still to this day for the bot, was completely missed through all of this. So both on their calls, in the call center, and through all of the beta testing, was completely lost. So it goes to that point that I was talking about, being comfortable in the fact that your bot will not be perfect, especially at launch, and being able to quickly change and quickly iterate and really find that, you know, you're going to miss the mark, and you have to be okay, and just actually build from it and be quick to return. And I think those sorts of things really helped me, because that was early when I started, you know, working on bots, and that really helped me have that comfort. And I hope for those that I have worked with in the past, that provide them comfort in going, it's okay, like it will fail, there will be broken things, and you're not going to anticipate everything. It's about just looking at it, finding it, and fixing it.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that from UX design in general is like that. Your first duckling is always ugly. The first times you design something, it's just like, even if you look at it like 15 minutes later, you're like, what the heck? What I was thinking when I did that. So yeah, that's I think something that you just need to learn when it comes to UX. So while I've got you then on there, what would be your 3 tips to give a new starter in the field of content writing to get started, to learn, to do something? Where should they look at? Something like that. What not to do.
Don't ever think that you know it all. So it's probably the biggest thing, because you will never know everything that someone will ask. And some people ask, especially bots, the most random questions in the most random ways. So you've never seen everything. A lot of those tips would be, look at what you've seen. So what Kay was saying before, look at conversations, read through them, really trying to understand how people are interacting with the bot, because that's really going to help shape what that content looks like. And be prepared to take on the feedback from the customers. People can be harsh, especially when they think that they've got that anonymity within the bot. And if you've put your blood, sweat and tears into building something and you think that it's fabulous and the content's great and all the rest of it, and then all of a sudden you see someone come along and they just say something really horrible to your bot in a conversation, you've got to try not to take it personally, but actually see it as one of those opportunities to really grow on it. So I think anyone starting out in this sort of a field really needs to have a really open mind, and be really comfortable in being able to go, okay, I don't know anything, I'm a sponge, teach me, and really build on those things.
Good one. Okay, then Katie.
Interact with as many chatbots as you can and work out what you personally like and don't like and why you don't like it. I'm lucky in the government that we have communities of practice. So the people that created, your SAM bots, all of the Services Australia, they're happy to get on board and tell you what works, what doesn't work, and how they've iterated their bot to get where it is. And read. There are so many great resources on the web. Just read. And if you're writing plain English, DTA have some great style guides that I think most digital writers should be looking at, and bringing it on board. And I'm often referring back when people go, why are we doing it this way? I'm like, because this is, whole of government, we want it plain English, and this is the reasoning. So it's good to have the research to back up why you're doing it the way you are.
Could you post maybe some links on where to find those communities in the DTA part for the rest of the group?
Sure.
Would be awesome. Lisa, from your perspective, 3 tips?
Yeah, sure. So I feel like all my best materials things been spoken about already, but I think I think it's it's really important to start with content that you have on hand. So if your business has a contact center, or if you're collecting complaints, then they're brilliant when you're trying to work out what your users want to know and what's puzzling them, and kind of areas where they'd like to be able to self-serve or use the web to answer their questions and they're not able to. So those are really great kind of resources that you can mine, and that's sort of how we began with our bot. I think don't assume knowledge. So I think as much as possible, it's important that your content can be understood by someone who's kind of dropped into a node, rather than starting at the beginning of your decision tree and kind of working their way down to content. So if you assume that they've read the bit that came before, then your content won't make sense. And I guess the last tip would be just being direct, clear, and brief. So we know that lots of our customers now are mobile first. So if you have a brief answer, it's more engaging. You can kind of have that call and response style of interaction, but it also means that it's easier for that content to be read on a screen. So you're not taking up as much real estate, and I guess kind of think Adrienne kind of touched on this earlier, but if you're not sure if your content is direct and clear, then just say it out loud, read it out loud to yourself, or, you know, test it on your mum. And if, you know, if it doesn't make sense when you use it kind of in a conversation, then it's not going to make sense to your users in, you know, in this conversation environment either. That's what I think.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I've got that as well. I just recently had that with somebody. Remember that you're creating a conversational interface. So if you wouldn't speak that way, and if you wouldn't want to have it that way, then don't do it. kind of very, very simple as an approach. So Chris, from your perspective, your 3 top tips for a new starter in accessibility?
Yeah, I have to admit I'm kind of the same as the other points that have been raised. Do lots of reading, and you know, be open to learning. Certainly don't be caught up by some of the assumptions or misconceptions that are out there. You know, get into consuming as much content as you can and taking on new knowledge. And don't be afraid to get started. As I said, you know, just for something different, try downloading a screen reader, for example, just to experience something that you haven't experienced before. So just jump right in and start wherever you can, whether it's with a screen reader or whether it's installing a plugin so you can do some basic testing to get familiar with some of the issues. But certainly do the reading. Don't get caught up on the misconceptions.
Great. Thank you. So I've got here a few questions from people. I'll jump into those. Or maybe I'll ask you once, and the other ones are a bit more content oriented. How would you convince a business to invest into accessibility? I know that's a very commonly asked question when it comes to accessibility. So what are your big tips? I mean, you mentioned already before that it should be the same and like it should make extra effort, but business people don't always take that as an advice. So what else would you do?
True. There's a really easy one that you can take to people, and it's that you're limiting if you're not considering accessibility or being inclusive, you're limiting the users that can access your digital channel by a huge percentage often. So as we said, if it's 1 in 5 for 20% of Australians, but that number is even bigger once you start taking in people with low literacy or elderly with you know, mild vision impairment or whatever it might be. So one avenue you can go down is to argue that you know, attending to low-hanging fruit or being more inclusive will certainly open up your audience by quite large numbers. There's no other way that you can, you know, most of the time from UX and doing other tweaks, we're talking about single-digit percentage, but to be more inclusive and tick off some of the higher impact stuff often has, you know, can increase your reach by 20 or 30%. So if you really want to be crass and argue the numbers with the business owner, there's no other way to gain that much reach. But for me, I don't go down that road necessarily and talk about, you know, sales or dollars. I would argue that it's the right thing to do to be more inclusive and give everyone access to your products and your channel or whatever it is that your message is. So yeah, it's kind of it's not as solid an answer, but I think it's the right thing to do to be more inclusive.
Fair enough. Thank you very much, though. Adrienne, so we had Jara writing here, I write for chatbots for big 4 banks and find it sometimes hard to get the tone being Aussie and being open mindful for multicultural. What is your perception on inclusion of cultures in your writing?
Yeah, so it really is a fine line. It goes back to your company's brand. So there's, I guess, a difference between how you want your business to be perceived. And I assume for a big 4, they're not too funky because most of them are pretty static. But you know, if you look at a company like Jetstar as an example, you know, they're a little bit more funky. So some of their things would be a little bit more, you know, culturally up with it and what have you, as opposed to a government department which is going to be a little bit more stringent in its tone and what have you. If the bank is looking to use the bot as one of those mediums to really try and test the waters of a little bit more of a flexi tone, then that's a really great idea. But again, it's about really watching what that looks like, potentially even A/B test some of the stuff. If you do happen to have any information where you can personalize it, so you have a bit of an understanding, let's say it's an authenticated space and you have a bit of an understanding where you can maybe test some, you know, a bit more Aussie components of it and see how your customers react to it. But again, it's going to be one of those things to make sure that the bank or, you know, any business is going to be comfortable with that level of test and learn. If not, I would suggest to scale it all the way back to, you know, just give the information, and then every so often, if you want, try and slip in a little Aussie, you know, a little bit of Aussie slang, or even just test it through your social components or the chit chat components of the chatbot, and just really monitor it. It's going to be one of those things that you can't just go whole for leather, because it may have a negative impact.
Fair enough. Then Alissa, maybe to that, I saw you nod a lot, so I thought you probably have something to add.
Yeah, it sounds as though you know, some of the brand values that this bank has might be a little bit similar to Australia Post, because we do tend to you know, use a lot of slang in, you know, as part of our brand. And I think that, you know, if you're really careful about it, it can be okay. But I agree that I think probably the safest approach, and you know, it's probably not something that I would do within the bot a great deal, or that we would do within the bot a great deal. But yeah, probably the safest approach is to keep that kind of personality, or that sort of more playful tone away from the real business of your bot, I think. So, you know, when the customer has a job to be done, and they, you know, that I don't really think that people come to chatbots to be entertained. It's usually about something where they've got a problem, they need an answer, they want to self-serve, they want it to be quite quick and easy. So I think it's important to remember, you know, the core purpose of the customer being there, and that we don't kind of get in the way of that. So you know, if you put a bit more personality perhaps into your post answer, or into, you know, some of those follow-up questions, you know, if you're prompting the user about whether that, you know, that you can help them with something else once you've already, you know, completed their first query, then maybe that's a place to do it. But yeah, I think it's probably potentially maybe not the right place to be playing around with that kind of language.
That's a cool one, yes. We probably don't have that much more space for questions, but I'll ask or two more quick questions. So one, Katie, I'll ask to you. Emojis in chat, what is your view on that?
Well, I work in the government space, so they're a little more staid. That stuff kind of falls into the chit chat area. What Alissa was saying before, you know, keep to the task at hand, answer the question that the user wants. Our users are usually coming in for a specific purpose, and emojis probably not, in the chatbots I've been working with, appropriate, especially if it shows up in the wrong instance. If someone's put in something quite serious and a smiley face emoji comes up, you've probably done more damage than if you didn't have it at all. So we're kind of a bit more risk adverse, so wouldn't use those.
Fair enough. Good one. Then Greg had a very good question, a very interesting one, and that's maybe for everybody in the panel to put up their hand if they want, if they feel like it on that answer. So what are your views on using AI or machine learning to insert or write its own content versus having a fully scripted bot? Who wants to put the hand up for that?
I can start. Anytime anyone has ever talked to me about self-learning bots, which is kind of what I hear with that, I think of Microsoft Tay, which if you've never learned about it, Google it, because Microsoft put it into Twitter to allow it to learn from the users, and was quickly pulled down after a short period of time because of what it self-learnt based on user input. I think with all bots, some level of machine learning will definitely need to be utilized from a grammar standpoint, but it should always be human curated. So I think that the humans really have, there needs to be a human which is sitting in there and actually checking what's happening, checking the content that's being created, ensuring that it's on brand. Otherwise you can end up with a very rogue chat bot, and I would, proceed with caution.
Anybody else? Group to that? I can, nobody from the panel, otherwise I can give my personal experience also from when I worked for Bosch. We experimented around with those kind of things as well. We found it could be useful if you used maybe an auto summarization feature for a longer text. So where you said like, oh yeah, I found maybe a result here on this website that might have an answer for you. That's roughly what it's about, and using that. But otherwise, the machine writing tools, even the latest ones that are out there, have been very limited to actually how good they are from a result, and how sure you are that what they do is what you actually want to say. And especially when people come to a chatbot, it's quite often not just for entertainment, but actually for something kind of, don't always to say serious, but something important for them. So in that case, you want to make sure that the answer is also really 100% right, and not hoping that this machine learning algorithm will somehow create the right answer. It's kind of okay if your chatbot once misses the boat and doesn't understand the question, but giving the wrong answer is a completely different ballgame. So that's my learning, what I did from my previous one.
I might also add that it might depend on what type of content you're talking about. Like if it's about the weather and you're auto-generating stuff, maybe that's not such a bad thing.
Yeah, sure.
But I also used to work in government and was asked to advise Department of Fair Trading, which were going to build a bot around in the rental space. And it's like, no, you don't want your bot to provide rulings or rules about, your rental agreements, automatically generated. Because if you get that wrong, it's worse than Microsoft Tay's, chatbot being out there and being racist. You're giving someone the wrong information, they make decisions in their life based on it, and then you're up, the creek without a paddle. So it does depend on content, very much so in that area. And I know there are tools like Microsoft will do automatic document browsing and trawling to pull out answers. And so, use with caution, as it's been said, but there are cases that, your use case will say, look, we really want human vetted, human approved answers. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I put in the chat that there is something called GPT-3, and I haven't heard about it before, but it's something new kid on the block, I guess, and I hope maybe somebody can present it next time, what it's capable of. I've never seen a bot which has a natural language generator used in the businesses, but yeah, it would be interesting to see really if it can work actually. It'd be amazing.
Like post it to us in our group and we'll see if we can arrange something. And I remember looking at quite a number of those things when I worked for Bosch, and yeah, nah, we're like always like too serious. So I would be very interested to see that. It was like, as Dennis said, for some content, like automatically inserting values or generate some things. But yes, but yeah, anybody else that has an opinion on those kind of things, happy to jump in.
There are some things in the last 12 months, like that GPT-3 based one, but they're trained on, incredible amounts of data, like 50 terabytes of data from Reddit or something. So Google scale, but maybe not other organization scale is the problem.
Yeah.
An interesting source to use Reddit as your training for your chatbot.
Yeah, that can go nicely wrong. So, there's certainly more questions, but we're already 9:10, so I will hand over to Pavel, and maybe a quick reminder about the upcoming event. I think we had already suggested date, isn't there?
Do we have a
Dennis?
date already, Dennis?
Yeah, sorry. We are looking at early September, so possibly the 8th of September, the Tuesday again, same time, same place as always. But we are looking to just confirm our speakers are available for that time frame. That's both the hands-on practitioners as well as the sort of researcher view of the world for NLU state of the art. So we'll get them along and some panelists as well to talk in that session on natural language processing and natural language understanding.
Okay, thanks, Dennis. I think it's going to be a great session. So
Yeah.
I just shared the results of today's event, like a feedback. I think it's a great feedback, and definitely 94, almost everybody considers this session as a definitely useful, which I think it's good. Thanks, guys, for being here and presenting. It's amazing experience. I will stop recording here, but we can, as in our usual meetups, there is like after event a bit of networking, maybe for 15 minutes to chit chat about other topics or maybe even harder questions to ask. So thank you everyone, guys. Thanks for joining us, and see you at the next session.